Hello and welcome everyone back to another episode of the Publisher Lab. I'm Tyler Bishop, and today I'm not trying to frighten my co-host Shelby Kang with some kind of shocking or disturbing intro like we did last week.
I wonder if we'll get anybody writing in about that at all. Any complaints or if they thought it was funny.
I figured that it was a good one-off, but if I started every show like that, we may start to drive people to where they're very frustrated with the way that the podcast starts, or become concerned about your well-being in general.
Mm-hmm. I bet you could come up with a lot of creative different storylines each week, though.
Yeah, you don't want me to go there. I'm not great with examples, and I like to come up with a lot of things off the top of my dome. So I feel like things would get weird pretty quick, and then also spiral out of control after I run through some basic ideas through a couple episodes.
All right. Well, the first thing I wanted to start with is an article from Search Engine Journal, but it's actually a survey or a study from Google, but it's the 6 need states that influence search behavior. So Google conducted a research project in 2019 and discovered 6 different consumer need states that influence search behavior. So the research states that these behaviors are what drive intent, and it concludes that growth can be made if you kind of tap into these hidden need states. So the first one is surprise me. So this is characterized as search being fun and entertaining with a lot of different unique iterations. Help me is characterized as search being about connecting and practicality. So it's to the point and more likely to mention family and location. Reassure me is a need state. It's characterized as search being simplistic, comfortable, and trustworthy. So it's uncomplicated and more likely to include questions. The fourth one is educate me. So that's search is about competence and control. So it's lots of reviews, ratings, comparisons, things like that. The second to last is impress me. So this is characterized as search being about influence and winning. So it's laser focused using specific phrases. And the last one is thrill me. So that's characterized as search being quick and adventurous, just a new way to find new things. It's brief with just a few words and minimal back button use. So you could probably put on your marketer hat and then also put on your publisher hat, but is there any crossover here?
Yeah, I think that there is, especially whenever you think about the types of content that you're producing. If you're a publisher, Google search is one of the most popular forms of traffic for a lot of different types of publishing businesses. It's the target of a lot of different types of businesses that are in publishing. I mean, I would say it's probably the primary for most. And when you think about your audience, you're really thinking about that search audience and basically tapping into one of those different modes, if you will. And that's actually how the algorithm works as well. I mean, there are things that they being Google have talked about before as it relates to the types of queries and then intent, and then really you think about all the different things of is it a ranking factor or not a ranking factor, all these different things. Different queries and different results are going to weight all of those different factors differently. So we've talked about it on this show before, but something news related like backlinks and authority probably matter a lot more when you're talking about the latest news about Trump versus you're just trying to find the best recipe for a bundt cake, in which case social signals or even click-through rate or dwell time or something like that might lend itself to something that means that this is a better result or something along those lines. So I think in general, it's really good to think about this from the standpoint of this is really what you should be catering to, rather than trying to figure out how you cater to all of Google's different signals.
Yeah, definitely. I forgot to mention, but Google classifies these 6 need states into 3 different categories. So one being emotional needs, social needs, and functional needs. So you can kind of group that in as well.
My guess is that most publishers probably could say that the majority of their content falls in one of those 3 buckets as well. That there's probably not a ton of publishers that aren't massive that are doing a lot of traffic in more than one, or maybe even probably more than one of those categories, if I had to guess.
Right. The next topic I have today is from What's New in Publishing. It's about the rise of Dotdash. So a little bit of back history about Dotdash. It actually rose from the remnants of About.com. So if anyone remembers, it's that internet brand that had a bunch of how-to articles. But its parent company decided to rebrand the nearly 20-year-old site in a 15. I can't speak today. Let's
It
try
happens
that.
to the best of us.
Yeah. Okay. So Dotdash rose from the remnants of About.com. So if you don't remember, it was that popular internet brand with a bunch of how-to articles. So in 2015, the parent company decided to rebrand the site. So they chose to rebrand because although About.com was really well known, its articles were so broad that no one really ever thought of it as like its go-to resource for any one topic. So as the internet started to develop, users started to go to WebMD for health things or Epicurious for recipes, and they just stopped going to About.com. So in 2019, About's massive general interest content was broken up into 6 different standalone vertical brands. So they covered health, home, personal finance, tech, education, and travel. So the publisher also cleaned out its archives, going from about 1.4 million pieces of content to less than 300,000 across all of its brands. So while other independent media companies were kind of trying ways to find coverage in social media and video and trending topics, Dotdash doubled down on text-based articles and they focused on evergreen content or topics. So all of this combined kind of led to Dotdash reaching 100 million users each month. They now have 12 different brands, and the vast majority of their revenue comes from ads. And this is somewhat unusual in the time where a lot of major publishers or big publishers are looking to diversify their revenue streams away from ads. So with all this being said, I know in the past we've kind of touched on whether you should, break up your website into different ones and getting rid of old content, should you delete it and things like that. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my first thought would be is there's not a lot of pages you can take out of the About.com book that I would recommend at this current juncture. So take what they do with a grain of salt because they're in full-blown kind of pivot mode, which is there's probably a lot of different things you can go and look at throughout the About.com history where they've basically either done the wrong thing from a SEO standpoint, or from a business and publishing standpoint, done the wrong thing or done something with a short-term interest in mind. And so this entire strategy is kind of built out off of trying to figure out what do they do next, right? And they are big and they've got tons and tons of content, and so they have a lot of different pieces to work with. But one of the things I didn't hear about at all in that piece was profitability, revenue, kind of like the financial or business model behind that. And I think that that's a piece that a lot of publishers really don't think through when they start approaching these types of ideas or projects, which is maybe I'll break my site up into 3 sites, or maybe I'll do this, or maybe create a subdomain or sub-brand or whatever. And I think what you have to ask yourself is basically, if this goes as well as it possibly could from a business standpoint, what does that investment of my time, energy, resources look like, and what is the benefit of that? And then also the antithesis of that, which is what if this fails, and then like what is that going to cost me, and what is the potential impact? And if the potential impact is it ruins your business, and the potential upside is that it grows your business by theoretically maybe 20% or 15%, like that's not a great risk to reward ratio. And that's what I typically find with a lot of these. There's always exceptions to things like that, but generally I find that, breaking sites up into multiple different sub brands and things like that usually doesn't go well, even if it's just a subdomain or something like that.
Yeah, you'll see. I feel like nowadays, instead of breaking up into a different site or a subdomain, it's always like a certain type of newsletter for a certain vertical, or a different series or playlist for, that specific group.
Yeah, or even just a subfolder within, like you can you don't have to create a subdomain or create a separate brand just because you maybe want to start creating a new type of content. Just do it. And, like the leanest way to do it is to just do it, see if it's attractive. And if you grow an audience on it, it might naturally start to move off of your existing, site or infrastructure onto something else. Who knows?
Right. The next topic I want to talk about is from Vice Media. It's about the differences between Gen Z and millennials when it comes to content.
What is the difference, Shelby?
Well, a survey from Vice Media. Well, they took a sample of 650 Gen Z Canadians. Weirdly enough, only Canadians.
Why?
I'm actually not sure about that, but they are from the ages of 14 to 22. And that states that 90% of respondents are willing to pay for content they desire, and that the average person is already paying for 4 different content services. So Gen Z's primary motivation for consuming content is entertainment, and they also favor original content. On the flip side of that, millennials said they sampled 150 millennial Canadians from ages 20.
I love that you preface it every time with Canadians.
Well, I want to try and give you as much information as possible.
I feel like it's maybe like it's a dig at Canadians that you're throwing in there, but I'm just gonna leave it at that.
So those are age 23.
As if their data is not as accurate or something. Like they're just too friendly. They're to answer all the surveys.
I'm sure we've got a lot of people listening in different countries. Well, I'm sure I've seen the stats, so we definitely do. So I'm sure there's a lot of different differences that come with that. But millennials actually look to content instead of entertainment. They look to content to gain knowledge. So Gen Z prefers diverse global content. They want to explore and engage with a wide variety of different viewpoints. And this is because they were pretty much born into the internet. They were used to having a lot of different access to, extensive amounts of information from all over the world. Millennials, on the other hand, actually, they seek local content, and their topics tend to be more practical about food and technology and health, whereas Gen Z kind of favors cultural topics like music and humor and memes. So I thought this was pretty interesting. It's just kind of the world is slowly starting to understand Gen Z, and they're becoming more and more significant in the population. So it's just interesting for me to hear the differences.
Yeah, I always think that the cultural thing is fascinating, and I think it's fun how you can kind of divide people up and just the takeaways that people will have with that. But what I found interesting is you mentioned the thing of the likeliness to pay for content, and to me that strikes me as information or data that was collected to validate a premise. And who knows why it was Canadians they picked? We kind of joked around about it, but it may just be whoever conducted the research of the study, just that was the demographic they had access to. But either way, the reason I say that is over the last 100 years, there's not been a time in which the generation that you would survey would say that they're not willing to pay for content. Content has never been free, whether you think about newspapers or cable or any number of different ways that you could get content. People have been paying for it. We talk about like cord cutting in the United States quite a bit. But, you may be cutting the cord from the standpoint of you may not be paying a cable provider or ISP, but you're going to pay somebody. You're not going to go without the internet, and you're not going to go without some type of subscription to Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or whatever it is. So I think that it's just the shift in where people are spending money on content is changing. And I do think that there's this undertone in publishing to validate the premise that people will pay for written content. And I think it's because there are a lot of executives that are getting jobs based on the idea that they can make this work. There's always edge cases, but I think that the overwhelming majority of people will continue to learn that that written content is just not something people are really going to pay for long term. Doesn't matter what generation it is, especially now. But video content is definitely an exception. It's more costly to produce. When it's unique, it can very easily be walled, meaning like Star Wars can sell the rights to Disney or be owned by Disney, and you can basically make all episodes of whatever Star Wars related show only available on whatever you would want, and no one else would be able to access that without a paid subscription of some kind. Written content, it's much harder to produce something that has that kind of value. So that's sort of the reason why that occurs. We've talked about it before, but I do think that one of the things we'll continue to find with Gen Z is that they have been accustomed to, because like you said, they've basically inherited the modern internet. So in a lot of ways, millennials were born into the internet, but they sort of pioneered the modern internet. And the modern internet is sort of subscription based. So many things are, whether it's the technology that you use or the way that you access content. And so it does become sort of a formality in that I'm going to have to put my credit card on file to basically access something of value. So I would think of it in terms of that, which is if what you're offering is equivalent in terms of value to other things that people are paying for subscriptions for, absolutely people will pay for it.
Definitely. Do you feel, because you're considered a millennial, right?
I don't like that you said it that way, but yeah.
Well, technically, I'm also considered a millennial if you go by.
Are you? I thought
yeah.
you were,
I'm like the cutoff. But do you feel like there's a bigger difference between millennials and Gen Z, or millennials and like, say, Gen X, let's say?
I think there's a bigger difference between millennials and probably Gen X than there are between millennials and Gen Z, but the differences are, it's different differences, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think about it in terms of, it's not this real tight demographic either necessarily, right? So it depends on your, I don't know, like all the basic demographic stuff, but you and someone else that are on that kind of cutoff between millennial and Gen Z, and somebody that's an older Gen Z, are going to have almost everything in common in terms of like the way that you kind of interact with these kind of rigid buckets we put people in. I hate speaking those kind of generalities, but the people that are on the tail end of Gen Z before whatever we get after this Gen double Z, what I think we'll find is that you'll have more in common with, the late Gen Z will have more in common with the early millennials, or vice versa, however that works, than the tail end of the Gen Zs will have with whatever the next generation is. And the reason is because, like TikTok being a good example compared to Snapchat, I think kids, I'll just say kids, because 13, 14-year-olds I think really enjoy TikTok. I don't think that they're using Snapchat very much, but I think if you look at a lot of people that grew up with Snapchat when they were 13, 14, 15 years old using Snapchat, there's people that are in that bucket that are technically Gen Z, and I think that they would like look at the people that are using TikTok now and say like, TikTok's something for kids. It's not really the thing that I'm into, and yet they're still within the same generation.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. The last topic I have is just a quick one. A few different tips for growing Pinterest following from Search Engine Land. So it's been a while since we've talked about Pinterest, but I actually found these tips to be better than just like the normal run-of-the-mill ones that I've seen in the past. So the first one is to take advantage of certain occasions. So unlike Facebook, users on Pinterest don't log into their accounts to stalk their family members or their exes.
Is that what you do?
I don't even have a Facebook, so there's no stalking going on there.
Way to throw everybody off the trail.
No, now I stalk people on LinkedIn. So Pinterest is an action-driven platform. So pinners log in to find inspiration about a birthday party or a new hairstyle or to try a new recipe. So try and think about those days or those occasions that you can capitalize on. So the next tip is to look for popular group boards to post in. So I didn't even know Pinterest had group boards, but the best thing about joining these group boards is that you get exposure to new potential followers. But the important thing to remember is that you need to post things that will stand out from that board, and also to look for boards with thousands of followers. And lastly, this one seems like a no-brainer, but make sure your profile has all the necessary connections. So this includes connecting your social media, your own website to your profile. You can connect Google Analytics, So those are just a few tips if you are kind of dabbling in Pinterest. I know a lot of publishers will post on Pinterest, but don't really necessarily have a set strategy. So just a few I wanted to kind of give out.
Yeah, I think those are good tips. The Pinterest is a bit more of a mystery for me, just from the standpoint of it's not a platform that I've ever, as a marketer, publisher, any walk of life, spent a lot of time with. So most of the things that I've learned about it have been through people that have. And then had a good conversation with the head of publishing at Pinterest at an event last year as well. And they understand that they have a kind of a niche audience among publishers as well, meaning, the DIY, the recipe, the, kind of a lot of the different things that you mentioned. If you fall into one of those categories, there are a lot of really interesting ways, like some of which you just mentioned, to engage with audiences on Pinterest and really start to grow your audience and honestly grow something outside of, the wall that is the massive wall of traffic that is Google. And so I do think it's something worth looking into. The thing to be careful with Pinterest is that they very much are trying to bring more and more content into their ecosystem and trying to do less of sending it off of their ecosystem. So that's something that Facebook did a while back to publishers, and you've seen a lot less quote unquote Facebook publishers, meaning people that basically would build Facebook pages and drive visitors to their website from there. The reach kind of got tampered down by Facebook. And I think for Pinterest, what they really want is for publishers to create content directly on their platform, not create content and then share it on their platform. So I do think that that's the area you have to be careful with. I think most publishers are pretty good at understanding that dynamic. Boy, have they been burned over the years many times. So, it's always a hard thing to do in general because you have to get traffic from somewhere.
Definitely. That's actually all the topics I have for this week. Just a reminder that we are still taking applications for our Pubtelligence event in New York. So if you're in the area or have access to it around April 3rd.
April 3rd, New York at Google. And by the time you hear this podcast, there's a really good chance it's going to be very close because we were actually going through some of the applications this morning. And I'm always surprised at how quickly things start filling up. So if you're listening to this and you're like, you know what, I'd like to check this thing out, I would go online today and figure out if you can get signed up because we almost always book up within the first week or two of applications being open. So it's a great event. Hopefully we'll have a chance to meet you there. Anything else, Shelby?
No, that's all.
All right. We hope we can meet you again next week, both on the podcast, but if not, hopefully you're checking out some of our video clips and things like that, all available at publisherlab.com. That is publisherlab.com. You can give us direct feedback on the podcast or send us questions. We always love questions.
Publisherlabpodcast.com.
Oh, what did I say? Publisher Lab? Just Publisher Lab?
Just Publisher
Lab.
Lab.
It's Publisher Lab Podcast. Publisherlabpodcast.com. So hopefully the fact that Shelby had to remind me of that will be the part that sticks out and why you'll remember to go to the correct URL. Not the Publisher Lab, I'm not sure what that is. But we looked into buying it and it is taken. Mm-hmm. As you would imagine. Some publisher out there right now, like that listens to the show, probably owns it.
Oh, I also looked up the Instagram handle. That's taken too.
Goodness. Well, we want to thank you all for joining us, except for the person that bought publisherlab.com. If you're listening to this, we don't want to thank you. We don't want you to join us anymore.
But we're interested in
buying the domain.
Yes.
So actually do get in touch. So full of caveats for you if you do exist. And that's it. So we want to thank you for joining us on another episode of the Publisher Lab. I'm Tyler Bishop. Alongside me, Shelby King. We'll catch you next time.